In the summer of 1904, 20 million people traveled to St. Louis to witness what was being called the greatest celebration of human civilization ever assembled. They came for the first ever Olympic Games on American soil, for the ice cream cone invented right there on the fairgrounds, for electric cars and X-ray machines and a vision of the future. But behind the palaces and the fireworks, there was another exhibit. More than 2,000 human beings from Africa, the Philippines, and the American plains were transported to St. Louis, placed in fenced enclosures, and displayed like animals for the paying public to stare at. They were not performers, they were not volunteers, they were exhibits. And the men who built this called it progress. The 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition covered 1,272 acres in Forest Park, nearly twice the size of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, more than 1,500 buildings, 62 nations, $50 million, roughly $1.8 billion today. Officially, it celebrated the centennial of the Louisiana Purchase, the land deal that doubled America's size. What it didn't advertise was everything that had happened to get that land: the forced removal of native nations, the expansion of slavery, the wars of conquest. The fair was America's explanation, its justification, and at the center of that justification was a department that had never existed at any fair before: the Department of Anthropology. Run by a man named William John McGee. McGee was a senior figure at the Smithsonian Institution, no formal degree, but complete certainty. He believed human beings existed on a ladder. At the bottom, African, indigenous, and Asian peoples he considered primitive. At the top, white Anglo-Saxon Americans. This wasn't a fringe position. This was mainstream American science in 1904. It had a name: social Darwinism. And McGee used it to build the most ambitious human display the world had ever seen. He wrote in the journal Science that the people he intended to exhibit were, in his clinical language, commonly considered to approach subhuman types more closely than any other variety of the genus Homo. Published in a respected scientific journal, not considered controversial, considered scholarship. His design was precise. Visitors would enter from the primitive end of the fairgrounds, past Africans and indigenous Americans, and walk physically through what McGee called the March of Progress, arriving at the white American exhibits at the pinnacle. It was a theme park of scientific racism, funded by the U.S. Congress, endorsed by the Smithsonian, and 20 million people walked through it. The largest exhibit at the fair was also its most political. In 1898, the U.S. acquired the Philippines from Spain. When Filipino people refused American colonial rule, the U.S. launched a military campaign to conquer them. By the time the fair opened in 1904, an estimated 200,000 to 600,000 Filipino civilians had died from the war. The American public was divided on the Philippines. Many questioned what it meant for a republic founded on liberty to rule people who never consented to be ruled. The 1904 fair was the government's answer. Congress allocated over $1.5 million, roughly $54 million today, to transport more than 1,100 Filipinos to St. Louis and place them on a 47-acre reservation, the largest single exhibit at the entire fair. The message was designed: Filipinos were primitive, uncivilized. They needed American rule. Fair organizers fixated on one aspect of Igorot culture, the ceremonial consumption of dog meat, and arranged for the Igorot to butcher and cook dogs up to 20 times per week as a scheduled public performance. It wasn't a staple, it was a ceremony. But organizers didn't want nuance, they wanted spectacle. Crowds gathered and laughed. Newspapers ran breathless stories about dog-eating savages, Editorial after editorial argued that such primitive people could not govern themselves, that American rule wasn't conquest, it was civilization. The stereotype did not die when the fair closed. The idea of Filipinos as dog-eaters seated in that St. Louis enclosure persisted for generations. And the man who recruited the Igorots, promising them $15 a month, was later convicted and sentenced to prison for stealing that money from them. The people who built the human zoo couldn't even be honest with the humans they put in it. Of all the people displayed at the 1904 World's Fair, one man's story has outlasted the rest. Not because it is the worst, although it may be, but because it is complete. We know where it begins, we know where it ends, and the arc of it tells you everything about what America was in 1904. His name was Ota Benga. He was born around 1983 in the Congo, in what was then King Leopold II's Congo Free State, where rubber was extracted through a system of terror and mutilation that would kill 10 million people. Ota Benga was Munti, one of the people Europeans called pygmies. He was small, he was young, he had a wife, children, a life. One day he went out hunting. When he returned, his village had been attacked. His wife and children were dead. He was captured and sold. In 1904, an American businessman named Samuel Phillips Verner arrived in the Congo on contract from the Louisiana Purchase Exposition. His job, travel to Africa and acquire pygmies for display at the fair. He found Ota Benga at a slave market. He purchased him, then convinced him, a man who had just survived the murder of his family and enslavement, that traveling to America would be an adventure. Ota Benga, curious about the world, agreed. They arrived in St. Louis in late June 1904. Ota Benga was placed in an enclosure near Native American displays, including Geronimo, the Apache leader who had been a federal prisoner of war for 18 years, transported to the fair under armed guard to pose for 5-cent souvenir photographs. Ota Benga had filled his teeth to sharp points, a traditional decorative practice of his people. American newspapers, already primed to see Africans as cannibals, described him as the only genuine African cannibal in America. He was not a cannibal. He had never been a cannibal, but the headlines sold papers. When crowds pressed too close, and they always pressed too close, Ota Benga and the others retreated to their small shelters. The crowds threw rocks at the shelters to force them out. When the fair ended, Verner returned the Africans to Africa as promised. Ota Benga tried to rebuild his life. He found a new wife, then she died too. Grief-stricken, he asked Verner to take him back to America. Verner agreed, then ran out of money. In 1906, he arranged for Ota Benga to live at the American Natural History Museum. When that ended, he brought him to the Bronx Zoo. The zoo director, William Hornaday, saw an opportunity. He hung Ota Benga's hammock inside the monkey house, posted signs near the enclosure. Ota Benga was 26 years old. The exhibit sparked immediate outrage, not from white New Yorkers, but from black clergymen who organized, protested, and demanded his release. The New York Times defended the exhibit in an editorial, calling it absurd to make moan over his treatment and writing that pygmies were very low in the human scale. This was the New York Times in 1906. After sustained protest, the exhibit ended, but Ota Benga was hounded through the zoo grounds. Crowds followed him everywhere. He was eventually removed entirely and sent to a seminary in Lynchburg, Virginia. His pointed teeth were capped. His name was changed to Otto Bingo. He worked in a tobacco factory. He made friends. He learned English. By all accounts, he was warm, funny, and deeply private about his past. When he told people what had happened to him, they didn't believe him. His story was too monstrous to be true. On March 22, 1916, Ota Benga walked outside, lit a ceremonial fire, and shot himself in the heart. He was 32 years old. He had been trying for 12 years to find a way home. The man who put him in the monkey house later wrote about the Otabenga protests, calling the episode the most amusing passage in the zoo's history. There is a tendency when confronting history like this to treat it as a sealed chapter, to say, that was then, we are different now. But the ideas behind the 1904 fair did not die in 1904. The eugenics movement, which drew directly from the same scientific racism that built the human zoo, gained enormous power in America through the 1910s and 1920s. By the 1930s, the U.S. had forcibly sterilized tens of thousands of people deemed unfit, disproportionately black, indigenous, disabled, and immigrant Americans. The scientists who built the human zoo